Shalom. Today is Wednesday, April 21st, and we are here for our weekly lunch and learn. And okay, we are here for our weekly lunch and learn, and this week we are going to be studying the beginning of Parshat Kedoshim. I'm going to share the screen, and we have a very interesting mitzvah today. Okay, so let's get started. So the beginning of the Parsha, I'll actually open that up first, just so we see it. The beginning of the Parsha is, Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe, acharei mot shnei bnei Aaron, b'karvatam lefnei Hashem vayamutu. God spoke to Moses after the death of his two sons Aaron, when they drew near before Hashem and died. And then God says in the next pasuk, going the wrong way. In the next pasuk, God says, "V'yom Hashem Moshe daber el Aharon achicha ve'al yavo b'chol eit el hakodesh mi beit la parochet." God tells Moshe to tell Aaron not to come at all times, meaning only at specific times may he come into the Kodesh, into the most holy place. We're going to see what that means in a little while. What this pasuk is teaching us, according to the Minchas Chinuch, the Sefer HaChinuch, we'll get back to it now, is Shelo yichnesu hakohanim b'chol eit el HaMikdash ela be'eit ha'avodah. Right? That the Kohanim are not allowed to enter into the Beit HaMikdash, into the temple, but only at the time of the avodah, only at the time of the service. Shene'emar, and the pasuk is quoted that we just read, Va'al yavo b'chol eit, and do not come at any time, meaning there's only specific times. V'yazhir bikan, and so now it's the Sefer HaChinuch is going to expand this in a way which we may not have thought. He says as follows: V'yazhir bikan kohen gadol mehikanes bebeit kodshei kadoshim v'afilu b'yom kippurim ela b'zman ha'avodah. You may be aware that the kohen gadol only entered into the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh HaKadoshim, once a year, only on Yom Kippur. But here, the Sefer HaChinuch is telling us that not only is he only allowed on Yom Kippur, he's only allowed at a specific time at Yom Kippur. It's not as if the avodah is going to be whatever time it's going to be, and then he wants to come in whenever he wants to come in. He's only allowed into the Beit HaMikdash at a specific time on Yom Kippur, okay? And then the Sefer HaChinuch goes on to say the following. He adds about other Kohanim. V'chein yikanes ba'azhara, zo kohen hedyot, v'chein yikanes. Ba'azhara zo kohen hedyot mikanes beheichal kol hashana ela b'zman ha'avodah. And he adds an additional rule. And likewise, same warning, is that a regular Kohen is only allowed to enter into the part of the Beit HaMikdash that they go into during the year, only during the time of services. So, for example, a Kohen was not allowed to give someone a tour of the Beit HaMikdash. If I had a new Kohen and I wanted to show him around, right, I wasn't allowed to do that. Only during the time of the Avodah. So it's not only that he can't come in any specific day, let's say for the Kohen Gadol, only on Yom Kippur, but only on Yom Kippur during the time of the Avodah. V'yeh be'or inyan hamini'ah lomar shekol kohen lo yikanes b'makom shu ra'ui ela bizman shu ra'ui likanes bo dahainu b'shat ha'avodah. This is teaching us again that a Kohen may not enter into any place where he's normally allowed to be, except during the time of the Avodah. Okay, that is the mitzvah. Okay, the question is why? right? Why is that the mitzvah? Anyone want to share a suggestion as to why that would be that's a mitzvah? It's a prohibition. And excuse me while I check my phone, just seeing if anyone's locked out of the class. Okay, so
Can I
anyone
speak?
want to give a suggestion?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. May I
Okay.
speak?
Go ahead.
Okay. Because if you go in whenever you feel like it, it loses its specialty. It loses its specialty, its sanctity, its holiness. It becomes like I'm going in the courtyard to play basketball. I'll go whenever I feel like it.
Okay, that's right. Let's read the reason for the Sefer HaChinuch, the reason the Sefer HaChinuch gives for this mitzvah. He says, Misharshe HaMitzvah, the purpose or the root of this mitzvah, Sheyikav'u HaMishartim B'nafshotam Gadlut HaMakom, that those who serve in the Beit HaMikdash will be reminded of the Gadlut HaMakom, the greatness of the place, Uma'alato, and its loftiness. V'tihiyeh yirato tamid al pneihem, and the awe of the place will always be, doesn't literally mean on their faces, it's a bad translation, it means they'll always be in awe of the Beit HaMikdash, right? Familiarity breeds contempt. There are many examples of that in the Torah, and this is one such example, and it's pretty straightforward, right? That we're not allowed to enter. Well, a regular person, a non-Kohen, is never allowed to enter into the Beit HaMikdash, at least those parts of the Beit HaMikdash. But a Kohen only on a certain, only a Kohen Gadol, only into the Kodesh HaKodashim once a year, only on Yom Kippur, and only during the time of the Avodah, and all the other Kohanim also only during the time of the Avodah. The Sefer HaChinuch alludes to this idea in another mitzvah. We learned this mitzvah already, mitzvah tzadi hey, mitzvah number 95. He says this. He says, Ma shetir'eh b'sof divarai, v'achein miyirati litkarev el mishkan Hashem, ki adati kol hakarev hikarev im lo yitkadesh l'madai lo yir'eh habayit v'chai. From the roots of the commandment, or what I will see at the end, meaning he's going to talk about why to build the Beit HaMikdash at the end, but first he's going to talk about his general trepidation of even talking about the Beit HaMikdash, right? Even talking about the Beit HaMikdash. He says, I am afraid of drawing close to the dwelling of God, as I know that anyone who comes close that has not sufficiently sanctified himself will not see the house and live. Meaning you can't just go in there. There has to be a certain amount of hitkatshut, of sanctification, before one goes into the Beit HaMikdash. Even the priests that come forward for their service sanctify themselves in their mourning, in the sanctum inside, and before the Levites come to raise their hand in the sanctuary of God, they purify themselves, and Aaron waved them as a wave offering. Hence I said, I too will say my counsel, etc. So not only was there a restriction on going into the Beit HaMikdash at certain times, there was also an obligation of hitkatshut beforehand, an obligation of sanctification. The Kohen have to wash their hands and their feet before they went into the Beit HaMikdash. This, by the way, is how some people explain the obligation of washing our hands when we wake up in the morning, right? We wake up in the morning, and like the Kohanim, we are also, hopefully, going to spend our day serving God. And so before we serve God, we have to sanctify ourselves. We have to prepare ourselves. We have to do a ritual that reminds us that what we're about to do is very significant, very important, and that all through our day, no matter what we're going to be doing, we're going to potentially be serving God. And so therefore we wash our hands in the morning. So we sort of mimic the Kohanim as we do that. Okay. And that is the Tzadi Hey, mitzvah number 95. So before we go on to see how this, practically affects us. I saw that Zach had a question or a comment. Please, Zach, go ahead.
Rabbi, when you mentioned that nobody else allowed to answer Kodesh Kodashim, it's not exactly right statement, because we know that workers supposed to serve can get in to do some.
That's correct. Correct.
And
but not on a regular basis. I mean, they don't have regular entry. They only have entry when they're allowed to fix it. You are
right.
correct.
And also, Masechta Yoma, what we're studying these days on the Daf Yomi, so much add to the level how Kohen must prepare for such thing.
Yes.
Including the Kohen wife. She has to get special
Yom
room.
Kippur, right?
Yes, on a Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur.
It's a amazing. So many details added to this mitzvah.
That's true, right? Thank you, Zach. Excellent, right? And thank you for pointing out that it was a very interesting idea that workers who were non-Kohanim were also allowed in to the Kodesh HaKodashim. Okay, great. Any other comments so far? Questions so far about what we've said? All right, let's carry on then. So some of these halachot, of course, when the Beit HaMikdash is rebuilt, these halachot will once again be in play. But currently, we have some sort of, I guess, echoes of these halachot that we practice regarding our attitude towards the shul, right? Towards a Beit Knesset. So we'll look at some of them. This is from the Rambam's Hilchot Tefillah, the Rambam's Laws of Prayer, chapter 11. In the middle of chapter 11, the Rambam discusses a bunch of rules regarding our proper attitude towards the shul. He says as follows. The English is on top. Batei knesiyot u'batei midrashot nohagin bahen kavod u'michabedin otam u'marbitzin otam. Synagogues and houses of study should be treated with respect. They have to be swept and cleaned and mopped. The nohagim kol yushal b'sfarad u'ma'arav b'shin'ar u'eretz hatzvi lahadlik shashiot b'batei knesiyot u'latzia b'karkaan machtzalaot kedei le'shev alehem. And the Jews of Spain and the West and Bavel, etc., would light lamps in the synagogue and spread mats over the floor to beautify it. And Va'arei Edom Yoshvin Ba Al Hakisot. In other places, they sat on chairs. So that's about, even decorating the shul and having respectable seating. And the respectable seating seems to be governed by the place. In some places, it was considered proper to sit on the floor, and in some places, it was considered proper to sit on chairs. But in any case, it had to be done in a way which is in keeping with the common standards of the place, and it had to be swept, and it had to be mopped, it had to be kept clean. So this is another, an example of kavod Beit HaKnesset, that we're supposed to treat it with a certain amount of respect, and the Rambam is going to go on. He says as follows: Batei knesiyot u'batei midrashot ein nohagin bahen kalut rosh v'gon schok v'hitul v'sicha b'telah. No lightheadedness or frivolity and idle conversation should be seen in the shul. We're only in shul. We're not even supposed to have any conversation about anything else besides davening and Torah study. Right? Our other conversations should take place outside of the shul. And he goes on to continue. Ve'ein ochlin bahen, ve'ein shotin bahen, ve'ein neotin bahen, ve'ein metalyin bahen. We're not supposed to eat inside a shul. We're not supposed to drink inside the shul. We're not supposed to use it for our benefit, right? If it's raining outside, we're not supposed to run into the shul in order to get cover from the rain. I'm not talking about the lobby of the shul, the actual Beit Knesset, which is the place where we daven, right? We're not supposed to use that for any of these things other than tefillah and Torah study. And he gives us some examples. And on a sunny day, one should not enter the synagogue from the sun, and on a rainy day, one should not enter the synagogue to seek shelter from the rain. And the sages and the students, they're allowed to eat there if there's no other choice, because they would not have any other place to do it, maybe get in the way of their learning, of their Torah study. They are allowed. So here again, now the way our shuls are built, sometimes they're built with a condition embedded in the building that may allow some of these other things to take place. But generally, what we're getting here from the Rambam, what we're seeing here from the Rambam, is this idea that a Beit Knesset is a very, very special place, and it really should be reserved just for tefillah and Torah learning, just like in the mitzvah of this week. The Beit HaMikdash could only be reserved for usage for the specific things that it was set for, that it was established for, and even only at specific times that it was set for. Sometimes when I would be in Israel, and I'd be walking around whatever city, whatever town I'm in, and I would see a shul, I'd always want to go in and see what it looks like. And a lot of times it's locked, and I'd be very frustrated. Why are they locking the shul? But after thinking about this, it makes sense they should lock the shul. They open the shul up for shacharit. People come in and daven shacharit, and they lock it because people, well, they probably lock it for another reason. They probably lock it because no one's there to guard it, and they don't want people, just entering into the shul. But also it maintains a certain level of sanctity. This place is open for davening. That's what we do here. And I think that, so next time I'm in Israel and I get locked out of a shul, I'll remember this teaching from the Sefer HaChinuch, and I won't be so upset. Okay. The Rambam continues. He continues. Ve'ein mechashvin behen cheshbonot. Ela im kein hayu cheshbonot shel mitzvah gon kupa shel tzedakah upidyon shivum v'chayotzi bazeh. It's forbidden to calculate accounts in the synagogue unless it's for a mitzvah, meaning the only reason we're allowed to make an appeal for funds in a shul is because we're raising funds for mitzvah purposes. But we shouldn't use the shul for bingo, right? Although you can make the argument that the bingo is raising money for the shul, so I'm not sure. But you're not supposed to do these non-mitzvah activities in a shul unless it's for a mitzvah. Even so, for example, you can collect tzedakah in the shul, you can collect money to redeem captives in the shul, and also ve'ein maspidin bahen ela hesped shel rabim kigon sheyasham hesped gedolei chachmei otah ha'ir shekol ha'am mitkabetzin uva'in biglalan. And we don't even have eulogies inside of a shul, except for a eulogy for a great sage. And we generally try to avoid this. Sometimes you make an exception, and again, because our shuls are built, the language is al tanai. Our shuls are built conditionally, that they don't have that same technical level of sanctity that a Beit Knesset, a purely built Beit Knesset would have. And if they did, you wouldn't be able to do this at all, except you weren't able to do a eulogy at all, except for the Talmid Chacham or the great sages of the city. And I'll tell you, Rabbi Radinsky, alav shalom, was very, very strict about this. And when Rabbi Radinsky died, I offered the shul to his family. I said, for Rabbi Radinsky, we could certainly have his funeral in the sanctuary, and they said no. And we had it in the social hall, and they said no because they remembered how strict he was about it, and he would rarely let someone have their funeral from the shul. Now, of course, now with our situation, we only have one room, so everything's a little bit blurry. But when we had the sanctuary, I don't remember ever having a funeral in the sanctuary, including Rabbi Radinsky's funeral, which we had in the social hall, because it's set for a certain thing, Torah learning and tefillah, and anything else, right? Even a hesped, anything else is considered to be a degrading thing. It degrades the sanctity, unless again it's for a specific mitzvah. Okay. Rambam continues. Haya lebeit haKnesset or lebeit haMidrash shnei ptachin lo ya'asenu kapandria k'dei sheyikanes b'petach ze v'yotzei petach shekenegdo lekarev haderech. Let's say the shul has 2 entrances, and instead of going around the block, you want to go through the shul, so you can go through the block. No, says the Rambam, right? No shortcuts. You can't make the shul a shortcut. Sha'asur li kanes plan ela l'devar mitzvah. There it is. You're only allowed to enter into the sanctuary for the purpose of a mitzvah. So I have a question. What are you supposed to do? Let's see if anyone can answer this question. What are you supposed to do if you need something from the shul? I left my car keys in the shul, or my friend's in the shul. My friend's studying Torah in the shul, and I need to speak to her or him, or I don't know, something's in the shul. I'm not talking about the shul building. I'm talking about the heichal, the place where the davening takes place. So do I have to wait till it's time for davening? What am I supposed to do? How do I? Is there a way to solve this problem? Anyone want to suggest a solution? Go ahead, Nita.
Okay, you can send someone there to speak to the person you want to speak. And you said, can you please come out for a minute?
But how do you even go in there? You're not supposed to go in there unless it's for a mitzvah.
No. You come into the synagogue and you ask one of the people there, the workers, or I don't know, there are people around, no?
But they're not allowed in there either.
Call Ploni to come for a minute. It's very important.
But what makes you think I'm allowed to send someone else into the shul for not a mitzvah?
I don't know. Aren't they people who work?
So that's interesting. So maybe a worker who goes in and out because they're cleaning it up all the time would be permitted.
Because they are responsible for certain things.
Interesting. Okay. Interesting idea.
But that is a shaliach. In other words, you can do it through a shaliach.
Okay, we have to make sure the shaliach's allowed in. Okay. Ein shliach ledevar aveira. Okay. Zach, did you want to say something?
It's very much reminded that your recent teaching about bringing guns into the shul. It's what you do, right? You want to have it for protection, but because shul represents the peace, you cannot have and life. You cannot have anything that regarding mace or something
Right.
The killing. It just reminded me that how this related to this one.
Yes.
And but violation of this mitzvah, how I would handle, I would say at Shuva that I need forgiveness for a moment. I want to walk in and walk out.
Okay. All right. Interesting. So basically, Zach is saying, what's the phrase? The phrase is, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. Okay. Ellie.
First of all, Rabbi, when you put your emails up, we can see them.
I know. I was checking if anyone emailed me to see if they can't get in.
I understand. I just thought you'd like to know that we can see them.
Thank you.
But no, I was just going to say, I don't mean to be flippant, but I'd send the security guard in because no, everyone's going to let him in.
It's not a question of letting in. Are you even allowed to send the security guard in?
I think you would be, yeah. I mean,
Why?
you shouldn't do it if it's just for your car keys, but
why am I allowed to send the security guard in?
because I think when it's a matter of safety.
But it's not a matter of safety. I need my car keys.
Yes, well, I'm getting around the rules a little bit here.
The security guard's not providing any extra safety by getting my car keys.
Well, he's not. Well, it has to be something to do with being not Jewish. There has to be a way. We always use, the Shabbos goy sort of thing.
Not Shabbos.
I know, but we do use non-Jews.
I don't think so. I think only for Shabbos.
In other words, there is no way of sending anybody, and there is no way to disturb in the middle.
There is a solution. Here is the solution. Let's read the Rambam. Here we go. So again, no shortcuts. And then the Rambam says as follows. Mi shetzarich likanes lebeit haKnesset likrot tinok o chavero. If you need to go into the shul in order to take a child out or to call your friend, yikanes v'yikarei ma'at o yomar shmua v'yakarcha kikra chavero. Go in, sit down, learn a little Torah, and then call your friend. Then you've used the room for what it's supposed to be used for. It's a loophole, but it gets around the problem. There it is. So that we do not enter into the shul only for our own purposes, right? The shul is for cheftzei shamayim, right? The shul is for the needs of Hashem. Now it's true, I need to get my friend, that's important. And of course, this doesn't mean if there's a baby there that's in danger, you can't go in. We're talking about this. You want to go home you want to go home and your kid is there, and it's not. We're not talking about a dangerous situation. So here we go in, we sit down, open a chumash, read a couple of psukim of chumash, or open a siddur and say a chapter of Tehillim, or say over to someone else a devar Torah that you heard, and then. You can go. V'im eino yodea. Let's say you don't know a devar Torah, or you can't read Hebrew. Yomar latinok min hatinokot kirali hapasuk she'ata korebo. You ask a child's there or someone else who's there to read you a pasuk that they are working on. Oh, yeshema at beit haKnesset v'yachach say. Oh, or the last option is just sit there a little bit and then leave. Why? Even sitting in a holy place is a mitzvah, right? Happy are those who dwell in your house. So let's say I can't read Hebrew on my own, but now we have English translation. So almost no reason why someone can't take an English chumash and read a couple of psukim. But let's say whatever, there are none left. I don't have my glasses. There's no one to talk to, right? So I just sit there, and I'm sitting in the Beit Knesset, and by sitting in the Beit Knesset, I'm also engaged in some sort of mitzvah activity because I'm sitting in a holy place. And I think also what's going on here is by not going in and doing what you had to do and then leaving right away, it doesn't look as bad, right? It doesn't look like you just went in there to take care of what you had to take care of. It looks more like you went in there to meditate a little bit. And so that's a little better. It seems to feel a little better to the Rambam. And finally, before we move on to the next chunk, the Rambam says that the sanctity applies even once a shul is destroyed. Synagogues and houses of study that have been destroyed remain holy, meaning they're not usable. The building is still standing, but it's not usable. They still have their sanctity, and they still have to be treated with respect. They don't have to be cleaned, like we saw in the first halacha of the Rambam, that they need to be cleaned on a regular basis, but they need to be treated with respect. Okay, I'll get all the questions 1 second. So you see here that this notion of not going into the Beit HaMikdash whenever you want, and it only being used at a specific time for specific purposes, definitely has lasted the test of time into the halachot of our shuls, even though in the Beit HaMikdash only the Kohanim and the Leviim went in, except when they were repairing it, as Zach noted. And in our shuls, everyone could go in. But the notion of only going in for a mitzvah purpose is very similar to the notion of only going into the Beit HaMikdash when there was a mitzvah to go in there, meaning when it was time for the avodah on Yom Kippur or on every other day, when it was time for the avodah. So we see a little bit of a taste of those halachot, and reminds us. Now, I also want to point out that our shuls, technically speaking, even what we just read in the Rambam, technically speaking, do not demand that high level, because our shuls are built al tanai. Our shuls are built with a general condition that they can be used for other things, especially in our circumstance when we basically have a one-room schoolhouse and everything has to take place in the same room. But it still should remind us, right? That we walk into a shul, even our social hall shul, right? We're walking into a makom kadosh, walking into a holy place, and we should only talk about holy things and engage in tefillah. And we want to talk to our friends or chatter or make jokes or whatever it is. We should go outside. As we said, this is all in order to build us, to remind us constantly of the type of respect and awe we're supposed to have for these types of places. Okay, Shula.
Yeah, I used to, when I came to United States and I learned about all the function around Shul, I used to think about it, whether it's proper to have even Kiddushim, even in Zanctu Shul, and later on all the parties. I mean, really, it diminishes from the holiness of the purpose of the Shul, to connect it with parties, with singing, with eating vulgar, or rushing to the food, or make people even thinking during the tefillah about the smell of the food there, to think about the kiddush.
So when I'm davening, right, when I'm davening musaf and talking about the karban musaf, instead of smelling the burning of the meat, I smell the chulent. Yes, so you're right. Yeah, that's why shuls have social halls, and hopefully all that stuff takes place in the social hall. Yeah, you're 100% right. Totally right. Correct. Okay, I got Carol and then Ellie. Go ahead, Carol.
Yeah, and me.
I was gonna ask, is that why some synagogues in the quote unquote sanctuary have like a second covering for the aron? Like I know some of them, they have a curtain and then they have a wooden something that gets closed at the end of the service. Is that to try and make that distinction?
Yeah. It's for that and for they probably lock that also. But yes, sometimes a double cover is helpful in certain halachic situations. Correct. Good point. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, Ellie.
I have a bit of a problem with this. So even if you're finished davening, formally davening, you're finished. But, because you rushed or something. Now you're going to go back in. And so you're going to pretend, because you can't double do, or you
could always say more tehillim. You could always say more tehillim.
Yeah, you could, but
sure.
You see, that doesn't sit well with me, because it's like you're still doing it, just to get.
I don't know. What's the scenario? Why you davening?
You're going in to get your car keys, so
right.
It just seemed. I mean, it's like many of the rabbinical things. It just feels like a get around it thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's definitely.
You can't send in the security guard, God forbid.
It is definitely.
But you can go in and pretend. Yeah.
It's a realization of the reality, but what's accomplished there is that even though the person's coming in to get their car keys, they have to pause and think for a minute that really this is not the way to use a shul, and the required pause, the required reading of a couple of psukim or a chapter of Tehillim or Devar Torah, right? That is sort of the antidote to the lack of sanctity that's being experienced right at that moment.
Yeah, so, I get that, but your car keys or your baby shouldn't be in the shul without you anyway.
You forgot them. Yeah, your baby's a tough. Yeah, if it's your baby, just go in, because that's not safe. It didn't mean baby. It meant,
No, I hear you. Yeah.
All right. So let's see. Mom, you have something you want to add? Please unmute. Okay, Nitza, did you want to add something? Please unmute.
I'm just in awe for the ingenuity of us Jews to find always some kind of a solution. I admire it.
Yes, we're very good at that.
A good example.
Okay.
Do you hear me, Rabbi? Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, my question is, where I come from, Rockaway, we had a big brick, beautiful building with glass, stained windows all over the place, and nobody was using it. No, finally, the real estate people, they sold it, and now it's a private family home. So it's empty and void of everything that was Kedusha, but the stained glass windows are being used. They never were removed. Is that allowed?
So first of all, I have a personal connection to that shul. My grandfather was the caretaker, the shamish of that shul.
On 121st Street.
Yep. And I used to go visit him with my father, and he planted and he grew aravot on the side of the shul. And
Wow.
I actually left a note in the mailbox of the family who lives in there, asking them to call me because I wanted to go in and see what it looked like. Is that allowed? You're allowed to sell a shul. And then once you sell a shul, people, a private person's going to do whatever they want with it. And once you sell it, then sort of the sanctity is lifted. Yeah. Okay. I wanted to show you one other thing real quick regarding this pasuk. We're done with this overall topic, but I came across something which I thought was really, really interesting. Also about the same pasuk, but studying it from no longer a pshat direction, more of a homiletical direction. V'al yavo b'chol eit el hakodesh. Right, I want to focus on that, which means do not come at all times onto the most holy. Okay, so here it means we have to have respect for the Beit HaMikdash, and we extended it and expanded it to having respect for the respect as well for Batei Knesiot and Batei Midrashot. But Rabbeinu Bachya, who you see his years here, 1255 to 1340 from Spain, he has an introduction to every parsha, which he begins with a pasuk from Mishlei. Then he has an essay about one theme in the parsha, which he connects to the first pasuk of the parsha. So he does two things in this essay. He says, well, we're just going to focus on one. This is the pasuk from Mishlei that he focuses. Ki teshev l'chom et moshel ben tavin et asher lefanecha. When you sit down to dine with the ruler, consider well who is before you. So first he talks about we have to be very careful not to become too close to politicians because they only going to use us. It's actually very cynical. Politicians will treat you well as long as you're useful to them. And if you're not useful, once you're not useful to them anymore, they're just going to throw you out like yesterday's garbage. It's actually a very, very sort of harif, harsh look at politics. And at the end, he says, but there's another way to understand this pasuk, meaning not all of us could fully appreciate God. Let's look what he says. He says as follows. We'll read it in English. A more rational approach, the author speaks of the kingdom of heaven, right? The al yavo b'chol eit el hakodesh. Don't come whenever you think you want to the holy place. So he says it doesn't only mean the holy place, it means the holy being, God, right? Solomon warns man not to approach it over and beyond one's mental capacities. We find other verses in scripture describing God as Moshel, ruler, such as Psalms. For kingship is the Lord and he rules the nations. Keeping this thought in mind, Solomon warns you that when you sit down to eat with the ruler, you better be clear what nearness to God entails, i.e., who qualifies for such an elevated station in life. So it's very interesting. He's saying we have to understand who we are, and we have to understand who we are in relationship to God. You must appreciate that the food served at God's table is soul food, not of the type that is served at the table of the King of Flesh and Blood. The food you receive there is known as chachma, the spiritual equivalent to the lechem bread. It's a spirit, it's wisdom, served here on earth. The words ben tavin et asher lefanecha mean in essence that you must be sure to comprehend things about the nature of God by what is lefanecha, by what is before your eyes, by the historical record of God's actions. Meaning, theology is hard. Understanding God is hard. What's the way we should understand God? We just look at the world and understand look at God's actions. This is also what David said in Psalm 8:4. When I behold your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon, the stars, and you set it in place. The word ben between suggests that there are two distinct kinds of insight that one must possess in order to properly appreciate the grandeur of God and his impact on history as well as our individual fates. Meaning, I think getting into what he's trying to say is getting to the metaphysics of God is not possible for most of us. We appreciate God by looking at the world that he has created and by being appreciative for what he has done for us. The very concept, God creator, is not a point of departure in one's thinking, but is a conclusion one arrives at after having weighed all the phenomenon we are familiar with. Right? We don't start with creation and try to figure out what that means. We look first at the things which are more obvious in our lives. This is the meaning of the pasuk in Devarim, "V'hashevota el levavecha ki Hashem hu Elokim." When Eliyahu experienced a personal revelation on Chorev after he had been disillusioned, subsequent to what he thought would be God's triumph at Har Carmel, he had to experience a variety of supernatural phenomena before finally a most insignificant phenomenon, a whisper, proved to be the real thing, right? Lo ba'esh, lo barash, right? Is Hashem. It is due to such considerations that Shlomo hints that several insights have to be gained in order to appreciate certain truths about God. One more paragraph. If one is an intellectually oriented person, Solomon warns that one should not allow one's intellectual curiosity to cause one to bite off more than one can chew, intellectually speaking. He couches the warning in these words, thrust a knife in your gullet. What he means is simple. You do better to commit suicide than to reach beyond your intellectual capacity in coming close to the Lord. I meant to bring the Gemara, this famous Gemara of Arba'ad Nichnasim Lepardes, famous story that 4 people tried to understand the deepest secrets of God, and only one of them made it out whole. Only one of them made it out whole. Shlomo phrases this more clearly. Don't act the wise man to excess or you'll be dumbfounded. You can see what happened to the 2 sons of Aaron. Now he begins to connect it back to the Parsha, who were guilty precisely of the arrogance of overestimating their mental, moral capacities when they were described at the revelation of Sinai as feasting their eyes on divine visions, breaching barriers that have been designed to prevent precisely such a disaster from occurring. Death was decreed for them because they approached domains which were beyond what they were allowed to approach. This is the meaning of the opening lines of the Parsha. They tried to get too close to God. They tried to understand God in a way which was beyond their ability. And once it's beyond their ability, God punished them. And for us, we could, who knows what's going to happen. So I think what's going on here is that the Rabbeinu Bachya is saying, if one is not sort of bothered and stricken by deep theological questions, sometimes it doesn't pay. Actually, I'll put it the other way, it could be harmful to engage in them because sometimes the answers are not satisfactory because we're dealing with God and it's very, very difficult to understand God. And so he says we shouldn't do it if we don't, if we're not up to it, and certainly if we're not, if we're not sort of bothered, by it. And so he homiletically explains Al Yavo B'chol Eit El HaKodesh. We have to understand our own abilities mentally. Rabbi Soloveitchik has something similar to this. When Rabbi Soloveitchik talks about suffering, he says it's really pointless for us to try to understand why bad things happen to good people or why there is suffering in the world. It's an impossible question, and it may actually lead to us explaining away suffering, saying it's not so bad, all sorts of explanations as to why it's okay. And Rabbi Soloveitchik does not want that at all. Rabbi Soloveitchik is not interested in pretending there's no suffering. What he says to do instead is to try to, learn something just from the suffering, from our experiences, take control of our experiences, what he calls turning fate into destiny, right? Suffering is thrust upon us, but what we do with it is our decision. So he says we really should not be spending time on that theological question. It's an impossible question. And this is in his essay, which is really in a response to the Shoah, a response to the Holocaust. Because answering that question is going to take us down all sorts of roads, which may be dangerous. Now, of course, some people are really bothered by these questions and they have to be addressed. We shouldn't say, oh, forget about it. It's not important, do something else. But for those for whom it's not a big deal or not bothered by it, okay, carry on. There's no reason to introduce those type of difficult questions. And even when we are doing it, we have to realize that we only have so much sort of mental ability, and understanding God is not always easy, and often the answers are on some level not really satisfactory. So
It's
what's that, Shula?
it's difficult to answer our children's questions.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Yeah, I agree. We try the best we can. We have certain approaches that work for us, and sometimes they work for our children. Sometimes they don't work for our children.
In many cases, we fail.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It's true. So we had two things here. We understood Al Yavo B'chol Eit El HaKodesh to be talking about an actual physical place, and we have to treat the holy places with respect and only use them for what they are set aside for. And the Al Yavo B'chol Eit El HaKodesh, approaching God and studying and trying to understand God is not for everybody. We have to be careful. It comes with certain potential hazards. Again, if the question arises, we have to deal with it head on, but sometimes it doesn't, and that's okay for lots of people. Okay, my dear friends, thank you so much for joining, and I will see you next week. I'm very sorry about this Zoom problem. I will try to work on it between now and next time, but if not, you now have the password, which is capital UOS. If it brings you back to the UOS website, that's a problem. If Zoom asks you for a password, that's okay. That's UOS. If it brings you back to the UOS website, then we have not solved the problem. So hopefully we will.
Rabbi.
If not, I'll send out the
You just
link a second time like I did today. Yes, Shula.
We just put the regular link there. There's no problem.
I did, but for some people it didn't work.
Facebook or
It didn't work for some people. I'm not sure why.
no.
Anyway.
Yeah, Rabbi.
Yeah.
I called I was a little late, but I called the main office and they reloaded. They did something so that it was asking me for the password, but then once he did whatever he did, it allowed me to go directly through the link. So
without a password.
Correct.
Oh, good. So maybe it's fixed already. Who knows? See, I don't question God. Obviously, the internet is run by God. I don't question that. I just do the best I can. And happy to see you all. Okay. Shalom, everyone. Take care.
Hello.